Dragon Cannon. Discard one momentum. If this attack is blocked, add one card from your discard pile to your hand. So in that situation, my opponent's left with a decision either to take the 8 damage or let me go through my discard pile and pick up something else. So depending on what I have in my discard pile, they kind of have to make that choice. Is eating the Dragon Cannon better, or is letting me sift through my discard pile for something possibly more nefarious? I don't know if it's better than 8 damage, but hey, it's presenting two options to my opponent that they have to pick between, and they have to decide which one I want more than the other. So whether or not you're going to find something better than just doming them with 8 damage, that's up for discussion, but it brings up the topic for today, which is cross-ups. My name's Toy. Thanks for joining us for another attack line design guide. So a cross-up, all a cross-up is, at its basic level, is creating a difficult decision for your opponent where typically one outcome is more desirable for the person playing the cross-up than it is like a win-win scenario. But I know up to this point I've been doing like Sub-Zero's attack lineup as a base point up to this point for the 2 that I've done before this. And I'll do more afterwards, but in terms of a cross-up compared to an opener or bread and butter, a cross-up is primarily a function of an attack more than it is a category of an attack. And it also brings up a good, kind of a good segue into independent functions and dependent functions. So I'm not making anything up here. I'm not really like recreating the wheel. These are all things that already exist in UFS and people have already been doing for ages. I'm just kind of putting vocabulary to it so it's a little bit easier to talk about. Really all that means is an independent cross-up function is something similar to that Dragon Cannon situation I just said, where this card by itself, if you have momentum, you can use it to create those two options that your opponent can pick between. So either they block it or they don't, and either way I'm going to get something out of it, and it's going to kind of, my opponent has to decide which one is better, or which one that I'm actually trying to go for, that I secretly want them to do. Maybe I have a combo that I can pull off if I can grab something out of my discard pile that'll just kill them outright. They don't know that. They have to figure that out and then make that decision. So that's an independent example of a cross-up that you can use this card as a cross-up if you so desire. A dependent cross-up, I'll get into some examples of that later, and that's kind of why I'm not using Sub-Zero for everything, because Sub-Zero's lineup doesn't really have any independent cross-ups in it, but he kind of by himself makes everything a cross-up, because just on the fact that if your opponent blocks your attack, they have to use the card that they blocked with, plus they have to discard a card on top of it. So therefore he's adding a cost to blocking his attack lineup, which is kind of creating a very difficult decision for your opponent to make every single time you play an attack. So that's kind of why I didn't want to bring up just his attack lineup for this, because it's not really a good example. And I'd rather go through some other stuff here while we're talking about cross-ups. So cross-ups is more of a function. It's more something you do during the game, depending on the situation and depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And really what you're doing is you're presenting your opponent with another decision to make. And the more decisions you present to your opponent, typically the more opportunities they have to mess up and make incorrect decisions, letting you get ahead in the game. But I do have some examples of independent cross-ups. And so Dragon Cannon is kind of one of them. I know it's not the greatest because, again, it's doing 8 damage, so if they're blocking it, or they should be blocking it, and really what you're picking up out of the discard needs to be doing better than 8 damage or whatever damage you can put on it. So, but a really simple example of one is homing missiles, where that first enhance, you can either destroy one of your opponent's foundations that you get to pick, or your opponent can lose 3 vitality to cancel this effect. This one's great because on a 4 diff, they might just have to lose the 3 vitality, then they still have to deal with the block, or they might have to take chip damage from it, who knows what, right? So if you're playing this as a poke, then you want that damage to go through. And if I'm playing it as a utility card where I'm trying to snipe out a specific foundation in their staging area, then I want them to let me get that destruction off, right? So as I play homing missile, my opponent has to decide at that point, am I trying to play this with the intention of it being a poke, or am I playing it with the intention of it being a utility card? My opponent has to make that decision and then act accordingly, right? This is probably one of the strongest examples currently of an independent cross-up. There's not very many in the game right now. Another good example, not a good example, but it's an example of a card that you can use as a cross-up independently, is actually a card like Slaughterhouse. And this card's great in this regard because it's a 6-speed. And I don't know if you guys know anything about about thresholds in the game. I'll probably have to do a whole nother video just on thresholds. But In terms of blocking, the average check that you're going to make off the top of your deck is a 5. Well, not average, but the most likely check you're going to make off the top of your deck is a 5. There are some 6 check decks, and there's exceptions to that rule, people that run lots of 4s or whatever. But usually you're going to get a foundation. Usually it's going to be a 5 check, which means at a 6 speed, even if you check 5 and you have a 0+ block, they're going to have to commit at least 1 foundation in order to block this card. Okay, so on its own, they're going to have to commit 1 resource if they want to block this thing. That's if they are going to be checking 5s, and that's if they have a 0 block, right? If they have anything above that, you can easily look through their discard pile. Most decks aren't running 0 blocks these days, which is surprising, but it is. So then if just playing this card, if they want to block it, on average, they're going to be committing at least 2 foundations to do so. So what this is doing now is it's creating a situation where it's kind of like a stun 2 card if they want to block it. If they want to block it, it's up to the opponent. The opponent gets to make that decision. So do I want this to function as a stun card? So do I want it to be an opener? And it's already a pretty great opener because my higher low attacks get +2 damage for the rest of the turn. So it's very easy to present this card as if it's going to be an opener, but in truth, I could be presenting this card simply as a poke. And because it wears the cloak of an opener so well, it's very easy to sneak it by as a poke, thus making this card a fantastic cross-up card because I can present it as 2 separate functions at the same time, and my opponent, again, has to decide which one it is. Is this the only attack in my hand? Am I just playing this out to gain momentum and to get some chip damage through? I might be. Or I might be pushing this thing through just to set up my kill string, right? And I want them to block it. So it's just, again, kind of those presentations. Another card similar as Slaughterhouse is Iron Knuckle, because you can get it again to that 5 speed, 5 damage, and it seals the thing that they're going to try to block with. So again, you can burn, if they have tech blocks or breaker blocks that they're going to try to save, it eats those. It can do all sorts of things. So it's just, again, creating that situation where it can consume resources if your opponent blocks it, and if they don't block it, you can be presenting it as a poke. It's not as good of an example as the Slaughterhouse example, but it's kind of in a similar boat, right? Anything that can push itself up to the 5 speed threshold, depending on what kind of blocks your opponent's running, will create an environment where they need to commit resources in order to deal with it in some way, shape, or form. Or they're going to have to commit something to reduce its speed, or they're going to have to, burn some other resource to reduce its damage. Whatever the resource is that you're going to be eating, presenting attacks like these, they demand attention in one way, shape, or form, right? That's kind of how you can determine an independent cross-up. Anything that you can present is 2 separate functions that your opponent has to decide between. So dependent functions, so in this case, a dependent cross-up, like I said with the Sub-Zero example, where anything they block, they're going to have to burn a card on the block itself plus the one they have to discard for it. That's an example of a character dependent function. Examples of non-character dependent functions, this is where it starts turning into, depending on what your lineup is, a card can be presented as a cross-up, again in that similar fashion where is it a poke or is it a setup or is it a what. It's dependent on a few things. One, it's dependent on your opponent understanding game flow enough. So this might not be relevant in some locals or against lesser skill players where they just don't understand game flow or what cards do. But if you're playing with competent players, this definitely becomes very relevant. Okay, specifically a card like Tiger Uppercut. Let's look at this one. So it says, my next attack this turn gets the next attack gets +3 -3 damage. Discard a face down card from my card pool. It's a 5. It's a 2 low for 5. Stun 1, right? I could just be playing this out as a poke, right? And if I'm playing this out as a poke, my opponent's going to be like, yeah, whatever, you're not going to be throwing anything else. I'm just going to block low and just let it ride, okay? However, if sitting in my discard pile is a Sagaki offering, now this changes the whole setup, right? So now my opponent has to strongly consider, can I deal with both of these attacks if he has a Sagaki to follow up the Tiger Uppercut? Because then that could be threatening, especially if my low blocks aren't good checks or aren't good modifiers. If I have a +3 low block that I was planning on using on this Tiger Uppercut, that's not good, right? Especially because lots of people use Spiders and Dragons for their low blocks, right? Because it's such a strong utility card. Of course, they're running it, and it's eating up 4 low block slots. So if they're pocketing that to block low, and they see a Sagaki in their discard pile, in your discard pile, they're going to be less likely to throw down the Spiders and Dragons to block this thing, because then I can follow up with the Sagaki, chuck that thing, get the +3/+3 off of their block modifier, plus the +3 damage off the Tiger Uppercut. And now they've got something really scary that they have to deal with that's far more threatening than the Tiger Uppercut, right? Whereas they may want to dedicate more resources to stopping this than they would to this. And again, it takes you reading the game state to know if you can present this as that function or not. And it also takes your opponent understanding game flow enough. So it depends on the competency of your opponent and on the game state and your awareness of the game state. So like, I'm not talking about really simple mechanics here, but I'm talking about things that occur very often in higher level play that people will do to each other. I know locally I have to do this kind of crap all the time to even try to squeeze an attack through, because it's ridiculous otherwise. You need to present difficult decisions to your opponent if you want to get them to make mistakes, especially when you're dealing with higher skill players. It's very important. Another similar example is I'm pulling cards right out of the Chun-Li starter now, right? Yosu Kyaku and Kikisho, right? This is another brilliant cross-up setup. If this attack deals damage, discard top 3 cards of your deck and add a kit card to your hand. Typically 1/3 of people's decks are attacks, which means if you're running kicks other than a Kikisho, you have a pretty high chance of drawing a card off this one, on top of the fact that, so now, goes back to that same situation. Do I block this thing, making sure that they can't draw more cards? Or do I just take the 3, let them draw, and then not have to worry about the Kikisho? Because if I see the Kikisho in the discard pile, I could be far more afraid of the Kikisho coming in, this thing getting added to momentum, and then him starting to string off on me even more, right? Again, it takes awareness of the game state, it takes awareness of your opponent's skill level, what's going on. Do I have Surveyor out? How threatening is this play, right? All these kind of things. So now, this is kind of good examples of cross-ups presenting 2 different possibilities. And so I'm presenting it typically as a poke or as a utility or as a whatever else right now. But now I want you to show you something that changes everything, okay? So let's look at the environment this way. So now we know that when I present my kick and my opponent knows that I run Kikisho, that it's creating a situation where my opponent doesn't know if they want to block or not. However, it changes instantly if I'm running Morgan, right? And I play this kick, and I discard the Kikisho, and I have it in my discard pile, right? And I'm showing this as an example to people that don't quite understand what I'm getting at, as a game state where I'm now clearly communicating to my opponent which decision is better, right? So, and I could be doing a double bluff on this, but odds are I'm not. Right? So in this situation where if I'm playing Morgan, I play the kick, I discard my Kikisho to give this thing +2/+2, it's coming at 5/5/5. All right? This is no longer very clearly a situation where my opponent wants to block this. Odds are they're going to want to eat the 5/5/5, and they're going to want to see what else I draw. Because at this situation now, they've gotten rid of a Kikisho, which is a pretty threatening attack. And as long as they don't block this, I won't get this back. And if they block it, not only do I get it back, but then I can play it and threaten this more, right? And then get my combo off and away we go. However, what that does do for me as a Morgan player, for those people who do like playing Morgan, is that this play, like I said, it could be a double bluff, where my intention is I really need to get chip damage through, and that could be the play I make in order to ensure that a competent opponent makes the correct decision and lets the 5 damage through. All right, I don't know if this is all making sense to you people. I'm trying to explain it the best I possibly can, but these are the kind of things that you're going to want to start thinking about, because these are the plays where strong players will beat out weaker players every day of the week. Even with crappier decks, they'll run circles around you, simply because once they know what your play patterns are and what your behavioral patterns are, they can take advantage of it in this manner, right? And this is a very good example of that, where it's like, once I know how I can get easy damage through on you, right? Even if I knew that you were capable of blocking both of these, I can often threaten a chain. By presenting a more threatening target, you'll take the lesser of the 2, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making totally clear sense. Maybe someone who's better at communicating can clear things up too, and send me a line on that. But yeah, that's cross-ups, and hopefully this was at least a little bit educational for you, and I'm explaining things half well. You guys are getting something out of this. But anyways, until next time, with Hit Confirms, this was Toy.